Everyone, just so you're aware, this is going to be recorded. So if that affects how you want to chat or ask questions or whatever, please keep that in mind. And thank you and welcome, Rabbi Rob, and
Hi.
thank you for presenting with us. So I'll turn it over to you so we can get started.
Sure, of course. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Nice to see you guys again.
You too.
Can we do a gallery view on the
Absolutely.
screen? Okay, so, right. When Colin asked me to do this over the summer, obviously we were going to talk about different things, right? You know, there's love to share about my faith tradition, and you know, I think the name of these courses is like basic faiths or whatever, basic beliefs, which is it's a topic we can approach. Just a heads up, right? Just because of like the nature of what we've been doing this week, I do have a hard stop at 10:45, and so we'll make our way through the conversation. But then I'll run out of here. That's not my intention, but I'm just trying to juggle a lot of things at the moment. All that being said, right, I want this conversation to be as informative and helpful as possible, right? And so I just want to start just with like gathering some questions that we want to talk about over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, whether it's about Israel, Palestine, or Judaism in general, right? What do we want to get out of this conversation? We can take it in whatever direction we see fit, but I want to make sure that it's addressing the needs of this group. So with that being said, just what are some things that you want to be talking about? What are some questions?
I mean, I know that we're fortunate to have a relationship with you, and but I'm curious more about some of the diversity that exists within the Jewish community.
Sure.
As we know, all belief systems have a lot of differentiation between how one person practices versus another person practices.
Sure.
So.
Hi, this is Zach here on the computer. I was just curious, I grew up in a Christian home and, went to church and studied the Bible and read the Old Testament. And I was just kind of curious, how maybe Judaism today is different than maybe in, Old Testament times, as far as, in the past, there was the temple in Jerusalem and there isn't now, and how all that impacts how you guys practice your religion.
Other thoughts, other questions?
If you could maybe just touch on what are some of the, sorry, I thought I saw something, basic tenets of Judaism.
Okay.
Just before we're done today.
Sure. Okay.
And then on the screen we have a question about, I don't know if you saw it, but about
life after
death.
Life after death.
All right. Well, okay, so this is a little bit of a blessing for me, so we won't do this. This was about Israel and Palestine, right?
I mean, obviously we're curious about that too.
Yeah.
As far as some of the basics.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is an opportunity for me to get back into a different headspace, which I appreciate, and that can be a blessing. And also, right, I don't want to move too far beyond acknowledging the situation, because it is incredibly impactful to my community right now, and it's something that is all encompassing. And as a student professional on campus, as a clergy person that works with students primarily, it is the primary concern of our student body right now. So we cannot discount that. And as we address some of these questions, which are fun, these are great questions that we can get to over the course of this conversation. The war in Israel and Gaza right now is an incredibly impactful and immensely emotional experience that our student community is going through. And I appreciate you giving me the space to acknowledge that too. That being said, we can work our way through this, and then, because Israel is such a fundamental part of the Jewish identity, right? That'll be woven in and may be able to provide some insight, like when you're working with Jewish students or when you're interacting with the Jewish community. Hopefully, this will give you some language to relate to Israel from a Jewish perspective. So we'll work into that. Okay, so when thinking, this is
Jackie.
Yes.
okay.
Look, I was just saying, I'd be find really helpful, just whatever you think is really important for us to know about.
The war, or
Well,
about Judaism.
about dealing with students who are not Jewish, but are encountering people who are Jewish perhaps for the first time.
Sure.
Just that check. Yes.
Sorry. There we go.
Okay.
Just an explanation as to what the question is.
All right. That being the case, right, this is similar to the frame that I used in this presentation to a smaller group last year. I think the easiest way to define Judaism, and especially when working with non-Jewish folks on campus, the metaphor that I use most often is one of a tribe, right? And so just as a tribe has a language and social structure and a particular structure of arts and laws and a faith tradition and a religion and a land, so too does Judaism, right? Judaism has within our tradition a strong connection and a relationship to each of these facets, right? So this is from Mordechai Kaplan. Mordechai Kaplan is the ideological founder of the Reconstructionist movement. He writes this book in 1934 that had a great amount of influence on me and the people that taught me, that talks about Judaism as civilization. And so rather than thinking about Judaism as a particular religion or as a particular land or as a particular language or as a particular social structure, it is all encompassing of these facets that create a civilization with a capital C. And so when we think about Jewish land, laws, language, social structure, folkways, tradition, we begin to conceptualize these different facets of Judaism and what it means to be a Jewish person and to hold on to a Jewish identity. And so, I'll say like the easier ones to manage right now, right? When we think about Jewish language, can I just hear some examples of Jewish language as we've encountered them in our own culture and our own personal experience?
Does Yiddish count?
Yiddish counts. What did you say, Steph?
Just said shalom.
Shalom counts. This is good. Yeah.
Schmear.
Schmear. Good. Nice. Anything from the internet? Anything from the people on screen? Yiddish. Excellent. Right? Perfect. Okay, great. So we have here this conception that we know that language creates identity. Jewish language includes these factors, right? Whether it's Yiddish, which is a cognate of Hebrew and German, or Ladino, which is a cognate of Spanish and Hebrew, or just like a Jewish American language as it relates to like our Americanization of Yiddish terms, stuff like bagel and schlepp and schmear and schlemazel and all these different things that you might have heard, right? Schwitz, spiel. Right, these Yiddishisms that have become a part of our American culture are rooted in a Jewish tradition that helped to inform our identity. In-group language is an effective tool to creating one's own identity, and it shouldn't be discounted, right? This is an important feature of what it is to be Jewish. And we can play the game with similar ideas, right? If we think about culture of the arts, we think about music and dance. If we think about social structures, right, we think about fraternities, sororities, synagogues, shuls, right, these places where people can come together communally. If we think about laws and customs, right, we want to separate those two things. Laws most often represent Jewish law, right? Halakha, this large compendium of knowledge about what it is what do Jewish people do? What are Jewish people obligated to do? What do Jewish people need to do? What do some Jewish people choose to do, right? That's all under Jewish law. on and on and on we go into Jewish land, right? And Jewish land can be any conception from like the east side of Cleveland to Skokie, Illinois, to, you know, Brooklyn to Israel. But these places that we claim as a part of our heritage they help to create who we are as Jewish people and who we are as Jews. And so I think Kaplan does this really great job of identifying these 6 different characteristics of what a civilization is. And it's helpful to keep that in mind when interacting with Jewish people, right? When members of your community are interacting with Jewish students on campus or interacting with Jewish folks just in the world, each Jewish person may have a different entry point into their tradition. They're all equitable, and it doesn't eliminate the other entry points, right? The person who identifies as a Jewish person because they're a part of a Jewish fraternity is just as Jewish as the person who identifies as Jewish because they follow all of the laws of halakha, right? And that person who is the most strictly observant, they follow all the laws of halakha, is just as Jewish as a secular Israeli person living in Tel Aviv who doesn't keep kosher and goes to the club every Saturday morning. Right? Like those 2 people are both equally Jewish, and on and on and on we go, right? There are people in my community whose only Jewish conception is that they say shalom, or that their grandma makes the best matzo balls, or that they, you know, participate in Jewish dance or sing Jewish music. These are entry points, and there are many doors to enter into this culture and tradition of Judaism. And your students, right, may not be interacting with the most observant folks in the world, right? When we think about the Jewish community in State College, it's very difficult to be a strictly observant Jewish person in State College, largely just because of the dietary needs, right? And there's not a lot of kosher, which is the kashrut is the Jewish dietary laws, right? It's just difficult. And so there's not a large observant community in Penn State or at Penn State in State College. Nonetheless, even if they're not strictly observant, they still feel a rich connection to their Jewish heritage through these other access points. One of the largest access points that we know of, right, is Israel, is the land of Israel right now. And that's why we're struggling so much in this moment, right? Israel was attacked on Saturday, and for most Jewish people, all Jewish people have a relationship with Israel. They may be more or less intimate depending on, you know, your own personal identities. Nonetheless, everybody's identity as it relates to Israel is under attack, and that's scary, and that's why, you know, our community is so shaken at the moment, right? It doesn't feel like an attack on something that's happening over there, right? It feels like an attack that's something that's happening in my heart, right? Those people are attacking who I am because my identity is wrapped up in a connection to that land. And so I threw out a lot of things, but I want to start to address some of the questions at the top of that we took at the top. You know, Rachel asked about diversity within the Jewish community, and we mentioned that just for a moment about like the level of observance. When we think about the diversity within the Jewish community, largely we talk about denominational differences. Denominational differences are defined based on their interpretation of Jewish law. And so we have this static document, right, halakha, that hasn't changed for hundreds of years, right? It's been interpreted. The manifestations of Jewish law have changed, but the static document is relatively consistent. A number of different sources for that document. It's besides the point. But the way that one interprets that document tends to determine their denominational identity, and then from there, the way that they observe their faith, right? So you're talking to someone now who's a Reform rabbi, and so my movement has a liberal interpretation of Jewish law, not liberal politically, we're not talking about, but just in the same way that there are liberal interpretations and conservative interpretations of the Constitution, so too are there liberal and conservative interpretations of Jewish law, right? So I believe in an ethical, moral approach to Jewish law, right? I choose to do the things that I believe are ethical and moral, not to say that other Jewish people are discounting their ethics, right? But I'm saying that I allow myself to discount laws that I feel like do not impact my community in a profound way, right? So I don't keep kosher strictly. I don't wear tzitzit. I pray in my own way 3 times a day, but I'm not following the most strict observances as they would be interpreted by the observant community, right? I'm realizing I'm using these languages like ethics and morals and things, right? The observant community also very strong ethic, very strong moral base, and right, they feel a sense of obligation towards all of the laws that are written, no matter their source, no matter their like anthropological, sociological context. And so and sometimes an easy way to understand the spectrum is that on the liberal interpretation, I see that question, yeah, on the liberal interpretation of Jewish law, right, we are seeking a source of meaning, right? I do things because I find them meaningful, and if my community doesn't find them meaningful, then I choose not to do them. I make an intentional choice not to do them, an educated choice not to do them. On the observant side of the spectrum, right, they do laws out of a sense of obligation, right? God told us to do these laws. That's all I need. You know, we're here. My observance of these laws is a manifestation of my faith in God, and that's important to me, right? I have an obligation to God and my community to do these things and perform these acts. So that's like a little bit about diversity within the community. I mean, there's also something that should be said about like regional diversity, right? There's largely speaking 3 primary Jewish culture. Primary is, I shouldn't even say primary. There are 3 large Jewish cultures that exist within the Jewish world. Those are Ashkenazi, which is largely Eastern European, right? I'm Ashkenazi descent, right? My grandparents are Russian and German. So that's anywhere, right? Eastern European descent. This is where like Yiddish comes into play. Sephardic, which is anywhere from Spain to Northern Africa. So Jews of that lineage, right? This is where we think about Ladino. And then Mizrahi Jews, which are Middle Eastern Jews, largely from what's now known as Yemen and Turkey, right? You know, native to the land of Israel, right? Mizrahi Jews from the Middle East. And those 3 traditions, where they share the same static text of halakha and our traditional sacred text, Torah, Tanakh, right? They have different cultural differences that impact the way that they, you know, live and move and work in the world. And that's really interesting. What I think is profound is that, so these 3 groups root themselves in this Jewish diaspora that began in 70 CE with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And that brings us to this temple question, which I'll address in a second. What has remained are the sacred texts, right? And those have remained consistent throughout all of these communities. And then you get to see, again, this anthropological and sociological layers and frames that are built on top. And all of a sudden, right, people's shofar looks different, people's, you know, kippah looks different, people's talit looks different, but that's all based on this, like, you know, the differences within the regions, less within the differences between the static texts. Okay, so we mentioned, right, this notion of temple-based Judaism, right? Somebody asked a question at the beginning of, right, like how has Jewish practice moved away from what's presented in the Bible, what's presented in the Torah, to now? I mean, these are, like, we can tell this story based on historical facts, or we can tell this story, you know, using other frames, but largely speaking, there was a time, right, from like 586 BCE up until 70 CE, right, where we were living in, where Jewish people may be referred to as Israelites, may be referred to as Jews, depending on what text you read, are living in the land, largely in the land of Israel, right? There's about 500 years where we're living in the land of Israel, and there are a series of 2 temples. And in these moments, right, this is still where, like, gets into the Israel-Palestine conflict. The temple is located, what we call Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount is located in Jerusalem. This is the place where God, hypothetically, came down to interact with and commune with God's people, the Jews, right? And so Jewish people would, go to the temple, pray, priests would perform animal sacrifices, and that is the way to communicate with the divine. And this happens in different forms, again, from around 586 all through 70 CE. There's extra biblical sources that also claim this. This is the religion that's presented in the Torah, right? This is the faith tradition that's presented in the Torah. We have elected a series of priests, and they will be the direct communicators with God. The way that we communicate is through sacrifice. We make a sacrifice 3 times a day to God. God, maybe consumes this as like the smoke rises, yada, yada. 70 CE, the Romans destroy the temple. And that is horrible, right? There's a Jewish fast day called Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the temple. In that moment, right, about 2,000 years ago, the Jewish tradition really, now this is, again, you're talking to a liberal Reform rabbi, and so this is going to get a little sensitive even within Jewish circles. To me, this is where Judaism in its modern conception begins, right? Before that time, right, we are this thing squarely based in this particular place. God cannot communicate with the Jewish people anywhere other than in the Holy of Holies, in the temple, in Jerusalem, right? This is the only place where God is communicating with the Jewish people. To communicate with the divine, you have to travel to, right? You have to make a pilgrimage to the temple at these prescribed times. This is when you're going to make sacrifices. This is when you're going to come together as a community. This is when you're going to communicate with the divine. When the temple's destroyed, for all intents and purposes, for Jewish people living in that time, the world is destroyed, right? You have no way to communicate with God anymore. And it plunges the Jewish world into chaos. And what arises from that chaos, what arises in diaspora from that chaos is halakha, is tefillah, prayer, right? And so all of a sudden, the way that Jews communicate with the divine is not through temple worship, but through worship of your own heart, worship within your community, worship to God, the understanding that we no longer need the priest to communicate to God on our behalf, but I, myself, any member of any Jewish congregation can communicate directly with God through words of prayer and acts of kindness. And this is a radical shift within the conception of Jewish identity. We see in the inter-temple period, right, after the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, and between the first temple and the second temple, we see all these psalms written, songs, prayers written about the return to Jerusalem. There's always, and this continues after the destruction of the second temple, there's always a longing to return to Jerusalem, but we no longer center temple worship. We center worship in community, no matter where you are, right? All of a sudden, God begins to travel with us. And that's an incredible shift. Now, we can, in a different tech study, right, with a different learning, I believe that we have a long tradition of that God has always traveled with us. Nonetheless, that's theology rather than, it's not for this presentation. Okay. So how do we practice Judaism today, right? It's largely based around prayer and community experiences, whether that's for festivals and holidays or daily prayers. Observant Jewish folk pray 3 times a day. I pray 3 times a day, right? 1 prayer in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, 1 in the evening. And largely speaking, what the prayers are, our prayer structure falls into 4 different categories. Petition, praying for something, right? God, please do this thing for me. Thanks, God, you're really great. We really appreciate you. Gratitude, which is it's unfortunate that the 2 terms that the scholars chose is thanks and gratitude, because those mean the same thing in English. It makes more sense in Hebrew, if you can believe me. But when we think about gratitude, it's really like praise, God's great, the Jewish people are great, the world's great, we love all those things, and then personal prayer, which is meditation. And so within each prayer service, we work our way through any number of different curricula, any number of different prayer structures that really address those 4 themes, right? Petition, thanks, gratitude, personal meditation. basic tenets of Judaism as it exists now, right? The world stands on three, right? The world stands on a stool with three legs. This is what Jews teach. They are avodah, which is work, which is, historically thought of as like doing the work of the mitzvot, of the commandments, so performing halakha, right? Making sure that you're keeping kosher, making sure that you are attending services, making sure that you are living your, you move through the world in a Jewish function. Avodah, gimilut chasadim, acts of kindness, so reaching out to other communities and your own communities to support the world of peace that we thrive in, right? We know that only through kindness can we create light in the world. And then Torah, right, which is like study of our sacred texts. So again, that's avodah, work, gimilut chasadim, acts of kindness, Torah, study of our sacred texts. Lots of good songs, right? Al shlosha devarim, it's catchy. There's good stuff that we can sing together about these three terms. Okay, big pivot, right? Judaism after death, life after death. The Jewish conception of life after death is interesting. First and foremost, there is no such thing as Jewish dogma. There aren't like three tenets that every Jewish person says, these are the three things, and if you believe these three things, then you're Jewish, right? As we stated in the beginning, there are at least 6 entry points. Like I think Kaplan does a good job of identifying 6 entry points into the Jewish tradition. Nonetheless, like while religion and law is a part of that, there are Jewish atheists, there are Jewish Buddhists, there are Jewish Hindus, right? Like when we think about Judaism, it encompasses a number of different identity traits. And so we can't say that any like central belief system about life after death is shared by all Jews, right? There are many Jewish people that say that after you die, that's it. And there are, I'd say, more Jews that believe in what's stated in our sacred literature and in our prayer services, which is the eternity of one's soul, the eternity of the Jewish soul. And so over and over and over again within our sacred literature, it says that our souls will be rejoined with our bodies during the Messianic age. And so when the Messiah comes, the Jewish soul will continue in a physical body. So you will, yes, be exhumed and live with your loved ones, right? All those people who are Jewish in the world to come. What Judaism also says is that the world to come is not promised, right? That we have to do these three things, right? Avodah, Gemilut Chasadim, and Torah to ensure that the Messiah comes, right? That like we have a duty to do that. And what's more important than worrying about the afterlife is making sure that we are creating and building a sacred world that we live in, right? This is this concept that you might have heard of tikkun olam, this notion that tikkun olam literally means to repair the world, that through our acts of love and justice and kindness, that we are preparing the world for the Messianic age. And what I believe and what most Jews believe is this notion of olam haba, right? The world to come, that this is an ideal that probably won't ever happen, right? Like I'm not a messianist, like I don't believe that the Messiah is going to come. I believe that our duty as Jews is to create a world that's fit for the Messiah, right? That we bring about the Messianic age through peace, through kindness, through justice. And that's what we're working towards, right? There's one of my favorite sacred texts teaches that if you're a woodcutter, right, and you're cutting down, you're making way for a farm, you're cutting down a field, and somebody tells you that the Messiah is here, stop what you're doing, the Messiah is here, you should finish clearing the field, right? That like your work here and now is more important than serving the world to come, that like what you're doing here and now, that the mitzvot were given for us to live by, not to die for. And that's an important feature. But there's no conception of hell within Jewish tradition. There's this confusing place called Sheol that appears within our sacred literature, but people don't really know where it is, and it's certainly not like for punishment. Right. The Jewish conception of the afterlife is a really robust conversation that I don't want to give short shrift to. Okay, and then I just want to close with like this notion of when members of your community meet members of the Jewish community, and perhaps it's the first time interacting with Jewish folks, I think the misconception within our American tradition is that our religion is like a part of who we are, and we can participate in it, or we can choose not to. And when we're thinking about Jews, our religion is certainly a part of who we are, and we can choose to participate in our level of observance, but we are still Jewish even if we've never been to synagogue, right? You're still Jewish if you've never had a kosher meal. You're still Jewish if you've never interacted with a rabbi, right? There are all these different entry points to our tradition, and that is confusing, right, to other people who can compartmentalize like their identity in that way. Jews don't have that privilege, right? We are considered Jewish no matter our level of observance, and that is something I think that like one should keep in mind, that there are people who are hurting right now, who are really scared to be Jewish right now. It's a very scary time for the Jewish people worldwide, who are grieving, who are mourning, who never had a bar mitzvah, never went to synagogue, don't keep kosher, right? They don't have a connection to perhaps the faith tradition of Judaism, but they have a very strong connection to the culture, to the family, to the social structures that Judaism provides. And all of those things help to build one's identity. And there we are. What does Judaism think regarding Jesus? Did he exist as scripture states? Is he the son of God? So, right, I think Matthew is responding with what I would say as well, right? So there, people have performed like eisegesis, right, to say that Jesus exists within different like Jewish texts. That's not a held belief within Jewish culture, right? There's an acknowledgement that Jesus existed as a messianic movement, a really popular and effective messianic movement that has done a lot for the world, right? Like that exists with, obviously, like we acknowledge that, and yet, right, we don't claim Jesus claims no divinity, right? There have been a number of messianic movements within the history of Judaism. Most saliently, right, in the 1500s, early 1600s, there was a movement of Sabbateanism, which is Shabbatai Tzvi, who also claimed to be a Messiah. He was living in Turkey at the time. Thousands and thousands of people followed him until he converted to Islam, right? And so like that, this happens often within the Jewish tradition, right? Jewish tradition is anywhere between 3,000 and 4,000 years old. So there's been a number of people who have claimed that they've been the Messiah, Jesus as one of them. And so like, whereas, as a progressive person, right, like I have a lot of respect towards the, Christian religion, of course, right? Just for me, Jesus is not the Messiah for me, right? Like that's not where, that's not what Judaism teaches. Yeah. How do people convert to Judaism? Right. So this is a great question. It sounds like something you're born into. Yes. Right. Judaism is this like cultural tradition that you're born into. To convert into Judaism is a process of what we describe as rediscovering your Jewish soul, right? We believe again in this eternity of the Jewish soul, that in the Messianic age, in Olam Haba, in the world to come, that Jews will, be rejoined with their soul and on go, right? We're living in this beautiful age of the Messianic world. And so a convert to Judaism is somebody who's rediscovering that Jewish soul within them. And so it is a process of articulating and becoming more confident in expressing the Judaism that already exists within you. And so that looks like, a year of study as one starts to begin to participate in different Jewish festivals and like follows the halakha, follows Jewish law to the level of their own comfort and observance. And it's never a straight path, right? There are twists and turns along every convert's journey. Because there's no dogma, you can't just say, 2 or 3 things and then be a Jewish person, right? It's a personal intimate, industrious challenge, right, that you have to work towards. You know, what are the ways that I can make sure that my Jewish soul is, you know, living and breathing in a way that is a manifestation of who I always am, who I always was, right? Like that I get to celebrate who I am as a Jewish person. It's a really great question. I hope that's a short answer. Yeah. Okay, I have 5 minutes. Are there any other questions?
Remembering something on there.
Oh yeah. Kippah. Okay, so kippot and other Jewish garments largely are symbols, right? Like I don't wear a kippah. The kippah is a symbol that God is above you. It's a sign of humility, right? It's a sign of piety, that, you know, by wearing something on your head, you have this understanding that you stop here, but there's something above you. And it has this symbol has become an important part of like an observant Jewish person's life, right? It's an important symbol. But that's all it is. It's just a symbol. It's not required within Jewish law. It's only a tradition within within Judaism. We call that a minhag, which is just a Hebrew for tradition. Yeah.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Seems silly, but I'm gonna ask anyway. We hear you and other rabbis this area called kippah, but yarmulke is one that's heard more
Yeah.
widely. Like, where does that come from?
Yeah, kippah's Hebrew, yarmulke's Yiddish.
Yiddish. Okay. It's interesting that that's the more prevalent term, I think,
Yeah,
around here.
right. What's more interesting, right? Yarmulke is most commonly spelled Yarmulke, which is
Weird.
Yeah. Yiddish.
Interesting.
What are you gonna do? Right.
I guess, like, for me, is there anything in the last 3 minutes that you
Yeah.
have? Like, you've shared a lot, and I appreciate your like authenticity in speaking about what's going on right
Yeah.
now. Like, are there other things you would want to kind of advise us, keep in mind as we interact with students, coworkers, anyone who is being affected right now?
I mean, the most important thing, thank you for asking that, right? The most important thing is just to be caring, right? That Jewish people within our mourning structure, right? The 7 days after the death of a loved one is called Shiva. It's this period of intense mourning. And the Jewish world is sitting Shiva right now, that everybody is mourning right now. And just as you would interact with someone who has lost a member of their family, so too, I hope that you can, you know, show that same compassion to your Jewish friends and family, right? That the most important thing in these moments is just to look somebody in the eye and say that you care about them, right? Like, you don't have to make a stance. War is horrible and atrocities are being committed and it's horrible. And there's no way around that. And innocent lives have been lost and they will continue to be lost. And my heart is breaking. And what is the most helpful thing from members of our community is just when somebody, you know, holds me and says, I care about you, right? You don't need to be the president. You don't have to be a geopolitical scholar to say that. Just like when you see a Jewish person, know that they're in pain right now. And it means a lot just to say, I care about you, how you're doing. Can I give you some coffee or some soup or a hug or whatever it is, you know, whatever your language is. And again, you don't have to make a political statement. You don't have to take a side to care about people. And that's all we're looking for.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We do care about you.
I know. And I really, and this community has given me a lot of support. Yeah. Alicia, really nice to see you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I have to head back. And normally, again, I'd like stick around and ask and answer any questions and stuff.
Do you mind leaving what you brought?
Yeah, so these are 7 anti-Semitic myths as they're presented by the ADL, which, you know, this is a really important, you know, list, just because I think, right, like, as we work in diverse communities, I think some people have a misconception about what anti-Semitism is. And I think that we've addressed that a little bit here, right? That an attack on, you know, any of these facets can feel hurtful in the same way that like a violent attack may feel hurtful. And so that's what.
If anyone online would like that document that Rabbi
I can
shared
send
with us, he can share it and we can pass it on. Just
Okay.
reach out to Colin or our spiritual email,
I'll send it to
spiritual@psu.edu.
Okay.
Thank
Thanks.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right.
See you later.